Hello again. Hope you're doing well. I'm Hardleg Joe, if you didn't know, and today I'm going to be talking about abortion. Because if you somehow haven't noticed, it's become kind of a big deal in American politics. And despite that, a surprising number of people don't seem to understand why there's even a debate in the first place. This is one of those strange topics where the answer seems obvious to both sides. In my experience, it doesn't matter if people are for or against it, most of them feel like their viewpoint is clearly the only correct one. And as a result, the other side looks blatantly evil for opposing them. That's why tensions usually run so high when discussing abortion, and why the debates around this topic often devolve into shouting matches. Because it can feel like a struggle between good and evil, rather than a legal discussion. So in an effort to avoid all those strong emotions, in order to get us thinking clearly on the subject, I'm going to try my best to approach this from as neutral a position as possible. I mean, at least at first. I do have my own opinion, of course, and I will explain it later on for those of you who are interested. But my main objective here is just to break the issue down as logically as possible. To try to explain why abortion is so divisive in the first place, and why people feel so passionately about it. For those of you who have already picked a side, this should hopefully give you some insight into your opposition. By understanding their beliefs better, you can hopefully make some better arguments in the future, and maybe even change some minds. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the subject, or just don't know what to believe, these first two parts should serve as a good introduction. That way, if you have to make a crucial decision in an upcoming election, you can at least be somewhat informed. Alright, so before we can talk about abortion, we first need to define a few key terms, starting with life. The people who oppose abortions often call themselves pro-life. And while I don't mean to disparage that label, it's a bit misleading. Because anything made of living cells is alive. Like, trees are alive. Cows are alive. Your appendix is alive. And it's human life too, because it's made of human cells. And you know, if you get cancer, then the same will be true of the malignant tumors that grow inside of you. They will be made of living human cells. But of course, the pro-life crowd isn't trying to stop anyone from killing tumors or removing their appendix, and they aren't protesting the slaughterhouses that kill innocent cows. The only life they're concerned with is unborn human life. Which begs the question. What makes an unborn human worthy of special protections? Why is a fetus worth saving, but a cow or an appendix is not? The answer lies in the concept of personhood. A person is someone who has rights and freedoms that are protected by the law. And I mean, most systems of morality, whether they're based on religion or secular philosophy, are usually focused exclusively on how we treat persons. The reason why we don't care as much about what happens to a cow or an appendix is because those things aren't persons. They may be alive, which means they can be killed, but it isn't considered murder, because only a person can be murdered. So now that you understand the difference between a living thing and a person, we can start looking at the two sides of this debate. The defining feature of the pro-life movement is that they think unborn humans are persons, which means killing them through abortion is murder, and therefore it should be illegal, like any other kind of murder. Now, the opposition to the pro-life movement is called pro-choice, because they focus on the freedom aspect of the issue. They often state that people should be free to choose if they want to get abortions or not, and that the government shouldn't have any say in the matter. That may seem like a completely different argument, but it actually leads right back to the idea of personhood. Because when it comes to choice, most people believe that you're free to do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anybody. As the old saying goes, your freedom to swing your fists around ends where someone else's nose begins. If we consider fetuses to be persons, well then aborting them is hurting them, which means no one should be free to do it. But if we don't consider fetuses to be persons, then aborting them hurts no one. And making it illegal means restricting the freedoms of actual persons for literally no reason. It's like banning dentists from pulling teeth. That's why most pro-choice advocates don't consider the unborn to be persons. They treat abortion as health care. It's a medical procedure, like any other, and denying it would be as cruel as denying any kind of medicine. And now, perhaps you can see why this debate gets so heated. One side sees abortion as murder, and the other sees it as senseless tyranny. It's not just a matter of personal preference, there are lives at stake. And all of those lives hinge on a single question. Are unborn humans persons? Now, trying to define what a person is more complicated than you might think. I mean, it used to be simple. For most of human history, the answer was obvious. A person is a living human. Easy. But then a couple hundred years ago, we discovered cells and cellular life. And suddenly that word, living, wasn't quite as simple as it used to be. If you want to use that old definition, then the unborn are definitely persons. Like, there is no debate around whether they're alive or not. They most certainly are, since they're made of living cells. And there's no doubt that they're human either, because those cells are human cells. The problem is that both of those qualifications also apply to your appendix and to cancerous tumors. Those are both living and human, but no one considers them to be persons. That would just be absurd. They are clumps of cells that live inside us, part of a person at best. So if we want a modern definition, one that applies to obvious people like you and me, but doesn't apply to our organs and tumors, then we need some third qualification. The most obvious way to look at this problem is to say that a person must have autonomy, which is essentially the free will to make decisions and the ability to act on those decisions. For example, I decided that I wanted to make this video you're watching, and then I used my ability to move and speak and edit to make this all happen. I have autonomy. Now, a toddler may not be the most rational decision maker, and they may not be able to move or speak very well, but they still have free will, and they still try to act on it, which means they have autonomy. My appendix, however, has not decided anything. Ever. It is incapable of making decisions. It sits inside me and just goes along with whatever I want to do. It has no free will, it has no ability to act, and therefore, it is not autonomous. Which means it's not a person. Same with cancer cells. Alright, so now we have this new and improved definition. A person is a living, autonomous human. Fits all the criteria we need. Now all we have to do is apply it to the unborn. Do they have autonomy? No. No, of course not. They are inside someone else. They are part of a person in the same way that an appendix is. Made of living cells, sure, but completely unable to act on the world at large. So, case closed. The unborn clearly aren't persons by the modern definition, so there's no reason to go on, right? Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. Because of course there is one big difference between a fetus and an appendix, and that is potential. Your appendix has no potential. It is what it is, and that's all it will ever be. A fetus, however, has the potential to grow into something more. It may not have autonomy right now, but given enough time and the right circumstances, it will eventually develop into something that does have autonomy. If we want to expand our definition to include this idea, then our new definition for a person is a living human that is autonomous or has the potential to become autonomous. It's a bit wordy, but surely this satisfies everyone, right? Well, no. Because now that timing has been brought into the definition, that brings up another question. If potential persons are deserving of rights, if it's considered murder to kill them, what about sperm and eggs? Those are potential persons too, made of living human cells, and yet very few people will treat masturbation or menstruation as a tragic loss of life. By bringing time into this debate, we're forced to change the question from what is a person to when do cells become a person? Real quick biology lesson. Biology 101. Every human life starts with a sperm and an egg. Those two fuse together to form a zygote, a single cell with unique DNA. Over the course of about 9 months, that single cell divides and multiplies, becoming first an embryo and then a fetus. Eventually, if everything goes well and nothing stops that process, the fetus will be born, at which point it becomes an infant. Now, if you look at that cycle, there's a very clear spectrum at play. At one end, we have sperm and eggs, which very few people would consider to be persons. And at the opposite end, we have infants, which pretty much everyone considers to be persons. In between those two extremes, though, is where things get fuzzy. Somewhere along that line, a bunch of cells become a person. The question is, where? And there are a lot of ideas about that. Some people believe that a zygote is deserving of personhood. That a single unique cell, formed at the moment of conception, is all it takes for something to have legal rights. But trying to call a microscopic organism a person is almost as absurd as calling sperm a person, which is why many have set the goalpost a little further along in development. Some say that the unborn gain personhood a couple weeks in, when the embryo starts looking vaguely human-shaped. Some say it's not a person until all its major organs have formed, when it actually becomes a fetus a few months in. Some say those organs should actually have to start functioning first, which is why some states have laws that look for fetal heartbeats. Still, others try to use math to find a solution. They'll cut things off when a fetus is 50% developed, or 2/3 developed, and say, once you reach this milestone, then it becomes a person. My point is, there are countless different rules and metrics that people have come up with to try to measure when personhood starts. And the fact is, they are all equally arbitrary. Like, there's no significance to any of it. You can say personhood starts with a heartbeat, but why? What's so important about the heart? It feels like you're just picking that because hearts have a poetic association with love, not because of any scientific or biological reason. Likewise, you can draw the line at 50% development, but what's the significance of that? It feels like you're just picking a nice round number because the halfway point just kinda feels right. And that exemplifies the fundamental problem at the core of the abortion debate. You can draw the line for personhood just about anywhere. But that's all it will ever be. a line in the sand. An arbitrary point placed no better or no worse than anyone else's line. If someone believes that personhood starts at conception, you can't really prove them wrong. And if someone believes personhood begins with birth, you can't really prove them wrong either. At the end of the day, you can't measure the human soul. Despite the fact that this feels like it should involve biology, this isn't a question of science, it's a question of opinion. And when it comes to opinions, there's really only two things you can base them off of. You can base your opinion on emotions, or you can base them on philosophy. Most people go with the easy route, which is why many modern abortion arguments rely on appeals to emotion. The fastest way to convince someone to take action is to either make them outraged or afraid. That's why pro-life advocates often call the unborn babies, because they know the idea of killing babies will cause outrage. And that's why pro-choice advocates often use the term forced birth, because the idea of being forced to endure something for 9 months is frightening. The entire debate is steeped in language meant to invoke something within you. And all this further explains why the subject gets so heated. Because the people discussing it usually aren't thinking rationally about it. They're either angry or afraid. Understanding that dynamic is key if you want to change minds. If you're going to fight strong emotions, you either need to bring even stronger emotions, or you need to try to do what I've done, and remove as much emotion from the topic as possible, to get people calm so that hopefully they can think clearly about things. As you can probably tell, I'm not a fan of emotional arguments. As I've stated many times in previous videos, I think emotions are unstable, fleeting, and easily manipulated. I don't trust decisions made on emotion. I'm much more interested in philosophical arguments, based on a foundation of unchanging reason. So for part 3 of this video, let's move beyond personhood, and explore some of the more philosophical arguments that surround abortion. Now I should warn you right from the start that I don't really like any of the arguments I'm about to explain. I think most of them are lacking, to say the least, and I'm not going to shy away from saying why. Still, I think it's worth mentioning these arguments. Partially because I know I'll get comments about them if I don't, but mostly because I realize that my perspective is not the same as yours. Maybe these arguments aren't convincing to me, but they might be for you. So if any of them sound interesting, or if any of my criticisms don't sound valid, you can always look them up on your own and make up your own mind. Anyway, starting on the pro-life side of things, there are 3 main arguments I want to discuss. Starting with Christians, who will often say that abortion is against their religion. And fair enough, that's a reasonable argument to me. I mean, religion is essentially a set of philosophical beliefs that give one a moral code to live by. I may not agree with that code or where it comes from, but at least it's a concrete set of rules and not just arbitrary emotions. That being said, as far as I can tell, abortion is not explicitly part of the Bible. I've been told that certain passages imply that the unborn should be treated as persons, but other passages seem to contradict that idea. Unlike some elements in Christianity, different churches have different views on abortion, and those views have changed over time. I mean, it's kind of a moot point regardless, because the First Amendment to the Constitution essentially says the government can't make laws based on religious belief. So religious arguments aren't even valid for deciding legality. Still, I think it's worth pointing out that even if we got rid of the Constitution, even if we were a Christian theocracy, this still wouldn't be an ironclad argument. There wouldn't be a consensus because the text of the Bible is vague on the matter, and thus subject to interpretation. Moving on from religion, though, there are some people who oppose abortion because they're worried that the population is not growing fast enough. They think that we'll need more children in the future in order for the country to function, and therefore, we shouldn't prevent any from being born. Currently, the United States has nearly 500,000 kids in foster care who do not have parents to support them, and countless others who do have parents that can't afford to feed or clothe them properly. So any argument claiming that underpopulation is a problem is just factually wrong. If anything, we already have way more people than we can take care of. Rounding out the pro-life section, there does seem to be a small but vocal group of people who just seem to straight up hate women. Like, I'm not really sure how else to explain it. In looking up arguments, I'd occasionally see people who were upset at the idea that women can have sex without consequences. As if pregnancy were some kind of punishment for lewd behavior, and abortions were a filthy trick to avoid that punishment. I'll be honest, this one just seems like completely illogical bigotry to me. Like, it is a philosophical argument, there is reasoning behind it. It just seems to be based on axioms that are so spiteful, so antithetical to a functioning society, that they might as well be emotional arguments, and therefore not worthy of serious discussion. Anyway, moving on to the pro-choice side of things, there's really only one big philosophical argument, and that is bodily autonomy, which is the ability to control what happens to your body. There are some who think that personhood is irrelevant here, because the freedom to control what happens to your body is more important than the potential lives of others. These people often point out that we aren't legally required to donate blood, or even to donate our organs after we're dead. This despite the fact that mandating such things would save thousands upon thousands of lives. And I must admit, it's more than a little absurd to think that right now in America, a corpse has more legal rights to their bodily autonomy than a living pregnant person does. That being said, I feel like this argument says less about the morality of abortions and more about the hypocrisy of American law. Like, if we ever did mandate organ donation, which we probably should, then anti-abortion laws would be consistent with the rest of our legal code, and this argument wouldn't hold much weight. It's also worth pointing out that this idea, that personal freedom is more important than the lives of others, is often used to refuse vaccinations and other health measures. And I mean, if you happen to be both pro-choice and anti-vax, then I guess there's no hypocrisy there, but I feel like those two groups usually don't overlap very much. I'm personally of the opinion that people should take some responsibility for the health and well-being of those around them. I think it's perfectly fine to mandate public health measures that restrict a little bit of freedom in order to save lives. And as such, I can't really stand by this argument, at least not without addressing the issue of personhood first. But then, I'm starting to get into my thoughts on the matter. So, why don't we go ahead and jump into that? I've got one more philosophical argument for you. This time, it's one I do believe in. One that I actually find convincing. Perhaps you will as well. So, previously on this channel, I made a video all about my personal philosophy. That video is nearly 40 minutes long, so I can't cover all the nuances of it here, but the super condensed version is this. I want the human race to survive for as long as possible. And I think the best tactic to ensure our survival is to form a peaceful and orderly society, where people spend less time fighting each other and more time working together to solve the big existential problems that threaten all of humanity. When it comes to making laws for that society, I advocate for whatever produces the most long-term stability. Whatever keeps our citizens happy and productive for the longest amount of time. So on the topic of abortion, that is what I base my decision on. If we must legally define what a person is, then we should choose the option that is best for society. And from that perspective, there is a clear, correct answer. The unborn should not be treated as persons, and abortion should be legal. Because trying to treat the unborn as persons doesn't accomplish anything. And trying to outlaw abortion is not only impractical, but it'll lead to long-term civil unrest. Let's think about this for a moment. If we made it a crime to terminate a pregnancy, enforcing that law would be extremely difficult. Oftentimes, the only one who knows that a fetus even exists is the person carrying it, and maybe their doctor. Which makes it pretty easy to get rid of that fetus without anyone else knowing about it. Especially since pregnancy can be terminated without using specialized tools or medical professionals. I mean, it's much safer to use modern medicine and doctors, but it's not required. People were ending their pregnancies long before the clinics existed, and they'll continue to do so even if the clinics disappear. My point is, since abortion is such a personal act, since an individual can perform it on themselves without anyone else knowing, criminalizing it doesn't stop it from happening. It just makes it more dangerous to do. Which means it's a law that accomplishes nothing in practice except to increase accidental injuries and deaths that could have otherwise been avoided. That's the best case scenario. There is actually an alternative, but it's far worse. Because you see, many anti-abortion politicians will not simply accept that the law is unenforceable. They will try to find people to punish. They need to justify all the time and effort that they spent passing these laws. But the only way for law enforcement to know that a pregnancy has been purposely terminated is for them to monitor us very, very closely. To keep an eye on your medical records, your purchase history, your private conversations, and your internet activity, checking for any signs that you or someone you know might be pregnant, so that they can make sure that pregnancy comes to term. The alternative to a useless law is an authoritarian one, because the only way to effectively enforce an abortion ban is to create an Orwellian surveillance state, where people are monitored by the government and have little right to privacy. And even if you wanted to do that, it wouldn't work out very well on a practical level. Because pregnant people, and people who can become pregnant, are autonomous persons with lives and desires. If you write laws that make their lives more dangerous, or try to override their desire for privacy, many of them will rebel against society. Whether that means large disruptive protests, or radical violent action, or simply violating the law in secret, the end result is all the same. It creates chaos and strife that destabilizes our civilization and undermines all our institutions. The fact is, anti-abortion laws will result in a large chunk of the population becoming scared, confused, and angry. And that is not good for society, because emotionally distraught people do not make rational decisions. They make reckless ones that result in people being hurt and lives being destroyed. Even if you don't agree with abortion on a moral level, you should realize that from a practical standpoint, it is better to just let people get them if they want, than it is to try and stop them. Because not only will you fail to save the unborn, you will hurt all of us in the process. if you actually want to prevent abortions, if that's something you're really passionate about, then the best route is not criminalization. It's creating an environment where people don't want to get them in the first place. That means in-depth sexual education so that people understand how pregnancy works. That means access to free contraceptives so that people can better prevent unwanted pregnancies. And it means creating robust social safety nets so that those people who do get pregnant don't feel like having a baby will ruin them financially. If you want more babies to be born, then you have to make a world worth bringing babies into. You have to heal our diseased society instead of just treating the symptom. But that's a topic for another video. For now, I think I've rambled on quite long enough. Hopefully I explained this pretty well. Hopefully you learned something new, maybe even got a new perspective on the subject. Regardless, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you have any questions or comments, as always, feel free to leave them below and I'll do my best to respond to them. If I get the same question enough, I might even make a follow-up video. I certainly got enough material cut from this one to make another. Regardless, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay safe out there.